Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video I'm going to do a review of the Laphroaig 10 Sherry Oak Finish, and we're going to look at the history of Laphroaig Distillery. So this video is part of a series that I'm doing and studying for the Level 2 exam with the Council of Whiskey Masters. However, I'm going much more into depth in this series than what is required by the textbook, the World Atlas of Whiskey by Dave Broom. However, I'm going to have a live stream following this, in which I'm going to have a little quiz. So if you want to join me in that quiz during that live stream, you might want to pay attention and take a few notes. In 1815, Laphroaig Distillery was founded by Donald and Alex Johnston. In 1836, Donald bought out Alexander and assumed control of the distillery. In 1837, James and Andrew Gardner founded Ardenstiel Distillery near Laphroaig. In 1847, Donald Johnston was killed in an accident at Laphroaig Distillery, drowning in a vat of fermenting wash. In 1857, Donald Johnston's son, Dugald Johnston, took over the operation of Laphroaig Distillery. In 1860, Ardenstiel Distillery was merged with Laphroaig Distillery. In 1877, Dugald Johnston died and his sister, Isabella, took over operation of Laphroaig with her husband and Dugald's cousin, Alexander Johnston. In 1907, Alexander Johnston died and his sisters, Catherine Johnston and Isabella Johnston, inherited the distillery. In 1924, Laphroaig's 2 stills were increased to 4. In 1927, Catherine Johnston died and Ian Hunter, Alexander Johnston's nephew, assumed control of Laphroaig Distillery. In 1928, Isabella Johnston died and Ian Hunter became the sole owner of Laphroaig Distillery. In 1954, Ian Hunter passed away and the distillery was then run by his secretary, Elizabeth Bessie Williamson. In 1967, Sigar Evans and Company, owned by Shenley, bought shares in Laphroaig and increased the stills to 5. In 1970, Sigar Evans Group reorganized as Long John International. In 1972, Bessie Williamson retired and the number of stills were increased again to 7. In 1975, Long John International was acquired by Whitbread and Company Limited. In 1989, Whitbread Spirits Division was sold to Allied Distillers. In 1991, Allied Distillers launched Caledonian malts and Laphroaig became one of the 4 malts. In 1994, Prince Charles granted his royal warrant to Laphroaig and Friends of Laphroaig was founded. In 2001, the Laphroaig 40-year-old was released. In 2004, the Laphroaig Quarter Cask was released. In 2005, Laphroaig moved under the ownership of Fortune Brands, also known as Jim Beam. In 2007, Laphroaig Vintage 1980, the 27 years old, and Laphroaig 25-year-old was released. In 2008, the Laphroaig Carchis and Triplewood were released. In 2009, the Laphroaig 18-year-old was released. In 2013, the Laphroaig QA cask, the An Quan Vor, or An Quan Mor, however you pronounce it, and the 25-year-old were released. In 2014, the Laphroaig Select was released. In 2014, Laphroaig Distillery owner Beam Global was bought out by the Japanese group Suntory. In 2015, the Laphroaig 15, 21, and 32-year-old sherry cask were released. In 2016, the Laphroaig Lore, the Carchis 2016, and the Laphroaig 30-year-old were released. In 2017, the Laphroaig 4 Oak, the 1815 edition, and the 27-year-old were released. In 2018, the Laphroaig 28-year-old and the Carchis Fino cask were released. In 2019, the Laphroaig 30-year-old was released and named the Ian Hunter Story. The Laphroaig 10-year-old sherry cask Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky. It's aged for 10 years in ex-bourbon and ex-Oloroso sherry cask. It's bottled at 48% alcohol by volume and sells for anywhere between $82 and $100 in my neighborhood. So this is really a deep, dark, rich, and intense whiskey. I opened this about 6 months ago. I currently have it down here below the top of the label. But when I opened it 6 months ago, I could tell this is a bottle that's going to need some time to breathe. If you've been tasting whiskeys for a while, you have a little bit more experience, say with peated whiskeys, particularly Laphroaig, I'll say particularly Laphroaig, they can take more time to open up. When I first opened this from the neck pour, it was very, I would say, sort of muzzled, and I could tell it wasn't very expressive. It was sort of dark and smoky, and I could tell it was rich and it had potential to open up more, but I knew it was going to take more time just being exposed to air and a few drams to finally get to a point where, wow, it is really expressing itself. Now, if you've ever had a peated PX cask, they also tend to be very dark, very rich, dark chocolate in combination with the smoke and peat. This is an Oloroso cask. However, it's almost coming across like a PX cask, if you've ever had the Laphroaig PX or perhaps any other peated PX cask, and yet it's not as sweet. PX being made from desiccated grapes tends to have more sweetness to it, but in terms of the denseness and darkness and richness of a whiskey, this is actually more like a PX than, say, a normal Oloroso. I've had a lot of peated Olorosos, and they tend not to come across as this dark chocolate character in the way this one does. Get a little salted sea breeze. Really nice spicy notes there. Some vanilla, dark caramels. The smoke and peat is very interwoven with it, but it seems like it has a very tight grip on it. So rather than coming across as layers of smoke and peat and sherry and so forth, they're really tightly knit together. A little bit of salty sea breeze. It takes a while, but eventually some of the more classic lemon and lime characteristics of Laphroaig start coming out through the back end. Again, I think like a lot of other Laphroaigs, it takes some time to breathe. The Laphroaig 10, and I've gone through a few bottles of that, once you get it past the shoulders, it'll start getting that peppermint, mint, chocolate character to that, and that comes through this as well. All right, on the palate. I wasn't impressed with this when I first opened it, but I'm really liking it now. The sweetness is coming through a little bit more. Again, it tasted blind. I might think this was a PX cask and not an Oloroso sherry cask. Oloroso, I'm gonna go more towards figs, dates, and raisins. This is much darker and richer than that. Dark chocolate, I would say chocolate covered raisins, but not, like the figs, and date notes. It's just mostly like a very dark chocolate wrapped around a raisin character there. Some real nice spice. Cinnamon. There's a little bit of a nuttiness there. Chocolate mint shows up on the back end. It's a nice whiskey. In terms of my personal preferences, it's really not hitting the mark. There are other Oloroso sherry casks that I like. When it comes to whiskeys, if it is sweet, savory, salty, sherried, and smoky, then you're hitting my 5 S's. This doesn't have, I would say, the more savory notes that I might look for, and the development isn't quite what I would look for. And another thing, with sherry notes, typically you get dried black, with Oloroso sherry, you typically get the dried black fruit notes, and the spice is more of a back accent, so you tend to get more dried figs, dates, raisins, and the accent is sort of on the back end. And that can work out really well. Sometimes you can have one with a more of a savory character to it, and so with the saltiness, it can come across like a barbecue rub. I've had that many times with either with sherry cask or peated sherry cask, and I don't get that here. The spice is a bigger character than the fruit notes. Now, if that's what you like, that's fine. But I personally prefer just a little bit of a spice on the back end and more of an intense dried black fruit notes up front. So it's a nice whiskey. It's a good whiskey, but on a personal preference level, it's not typically what I would look for in a Oloroso sherry cask, particularly a peated sherry cask. What would be something that I would prefer? You know, if you can get a Bunnahabhain, Moyne Oloroso, or something to that character, that would be more in line with what I would look for. But it is very nice. That's very nice Northern Highland sherry peated cask whiskeys. The Glendronach peated is very nice, for example. For some people, I think this more intense, spicy character is going to be what you're looking for, if that's what you're looking for. But I don't think it has quite the development that I want. I don't think it has the layers of complexity that I'm looking for. And yet, it's still a very nice and enjoyable whiskey. What would I give it in terms of a score? I'm going to go solid 88 points. Solid 88 points. What would I want to get it above over 90? As I said before, more balance and more development and more transitions through the mid palate. Alrighty, that's it for this video. If you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you've not yet subscribed, but you like watching my videos, I'm going to ask that you subscribe, ring the bell to be notified for when I go live, and don't forget to check out one of these videos over here. Until next time, cheers. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.